The thing on one of the things I wanted to really talk to you about that is a little more, I guess it's more technical, much more technical than I'm crazy about, but it does come up and it's important. It's a scale, the scales that we deal with. The basic pentatonic flute, which is the Native American flute, is a 5-hole flute. And so penta meaning 5, you've got 5 major notes. That's what the 5-hole flute's based on. And most of your tribal cultures throughout the world, matter of fact, except for Australia, all tribal cultures throughout the world had 3 basic instruments: the drum, the rattle, and the flute. And the flute is the oldest melodic instrument in the world. As a matter of fact, I'm sure many of you have heard about their archaeological finds where they found a flute made out of bone, come out of 2 or 3 flutes. And they were 65 to 85,000 years old, somewhere between that. You know, at that point, it doesn't make any difference, you know, give or 10,000 years. But the flutes were made out of animal bone, and they were based on a diatonic scale. I mean, I was completely blown away by that because I didn't realize that, musical instruments, first of all, in civilizations around musical instruments were that old. And it was wonderful news to me because it really confirmed that all tribal cultures had a flute, as a meaning that the flute is the oldest melodic instrument on this planet. And all of your older tribal cultures used the pentatonic scale. Now, obviously, they didn't have the name pentatonic scale attached to the flute. They just created it. They whether it's intuition or knowledge passed on, obviously, created the flute that was completely harmonic. So no matter what note you play, they all work together, okay? That's the pentatonic scale. And most of those cultures, matter of fact, not most, all those cultures, none of them had a written music language. That's the beauty of it. When written music language came to play, it gave us a tremendous amount of versatility, but it also made it phenomenally complex, to the point that most of us, now we have to have a designation as a musician, that has studied music. That's the beauty behind this instrument. I know you already know that, is the fact that it's so wonderfully easy and simple, and you just can enjoy it, okay? The next scale that evolved from the pentatonic flute, a pentatonic scale, is a diatonic scale. And that's the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la. And basically you've got 7 major notes. And the 7 notes are also on this flute, actually. But it's a little bit harder to get them. Now you have to stretch yourself a little bit. On the 6-hole flutes, you're 1 note away from the diatonic scale, which is 7 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? What's missing is the note between here and here, okay? Now, what winds up happening, the note between those 2 holes, you can generate it by half-holing the bottom note. So the diatonic scale would be okay? So the flutes are able to play a diatonic scale. The diatonic scale is not as harmonically locked into each note. You do have to play them a little bit differently. You have to know which note works well with others. Okay? Hence, a 5-hole flute's much easier to play than a 6-hole flute, because you're in the pentatonic scale, where the 6-hole flute, you have the variable of that extra note. Okay? The chromatic scale deals with flats and sharps. Those are all the notes that are in between the diatonic scale, the 7 notes. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, do, re. Okay, you have flats and sharps in between there. Now, this is more information than you may want to know, but I wanted to give it to you anyway. And the chromatic scale, look at some of the flute books that are out there. Okay, some of the flute books that are written separately with fingering charts in them. And you'll see that they do have the pentatonic scale, the diatonic scale, and the chromatic scale, and how to get those notes. Now, the fascinating thing is, I've heard so many people say, well, the Native American flute's kind of limited, it can only be a pentatonic scale, and that's not true. You can create any scale. You can play a chromatic scale on the Native American flute. Now, it takes some doing, and you have to practice on the fingering chart, okay? And the chromatic scale, you do have to know what note works well with another note, Because if you don't, it's going to sound dissident and out of tune, out of harmony. So it takes more, a little bit more skill, a little more memorization of the notes. But there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying it's going to take a little bit more, okay? The thing that I like about the Native American flute, and in particular, is that it has the ability, the flexibility to give you a full range of playing pentatonic, diatonic, or chromatic. It just depends on what you're trying to do with it, okay? And that brings us to the 5 or 6 hole flute. Now, what I've done in a lot of my flutes that I make is I make them 6 hole, okay? But I put a leather tab right over the 3rd hole from the top, and so that it makes it into a 5 hole flute. Once you decide, well, gosh, you know what? I really would like to play a 6 hole flute. You just slide the tab up, and now you've got a 6 hole flute. You can do that with any flute that you have, actually, and it's a real nice fix. The advantage of a 6 hole flute is that it gives you more versatility, but at the expense of a little bit harder to play, okay? Because for some reason, when you've learned to play, I learned to play on a 5 hole flute. When I switched to a 6 hole flute, I just went, I don't think I want to do this. It was just, I don't know what it is, that extra hole just kind of threw me over the edge for a little while. And then I decided, you know what, I need to do this. I really need to learn. And once I watched others play and I asked questions, and it was amazing. A 6 hole flute does have a little bit more versatility, but it does make it more complex. So if you've never played an instrument before, I have always suggested get a 5 hole flute. Just work your way into a 6 hole flute, because all of the techniques and everything you learn on a 5 hole flute, you'll transpose into a 6 hole flute. The thing about a 6 hole flute that I like, you have other scales. For instance, this is a pentatonic scale. By keeping this hole closed, puts it into the pentatonic scale, 5 holes. Now, if you keep this hole closed, it's still a pentatonic scale, but it's a different scale. Okay, variations thereof. And if you would like to play more notes in terms of the chromatic scale, you're better off with a 6 hole flute. You're going to be able to do that with a 6 hole flute. A 5 hole flute, in terms of the chromatic scale, has many more limitations, okay? Has some limitations around it. So both flutes are very valid. And it depends on the style of play. It depends on the type of song that you're playing. They're very valid. Both of them are very valid instruments. So, the idea of, 6 is better than 5, that's not necessarily so. I found that not to be true. Both instruments have the ability to be able to play wonderful songs and to play them in different keys and to get the very similar results. It's just you do it differently.